Today, May 12th, 2020, is a day we've been working toward in the year since we put up our first episode of this podcast series. Texas Congressman Louie Gohmert, along with 8 other congressmen, sent a letter to President Donald Trump asking for the release of the men of Raven 2-3. You can see the letter on our website, thinkagain.me, and on the Justice for Warriors Facebook page. It details the same misconduct by the Justice Department that our research has uncovered, the same pattern of abuses that hit the headlines this week. Our remaining episodes will detail a show trial put on by prosecutors who felt free to break the law to win the convictions of Dustin Heard, Evan Liberty, Nick Slatten, and Paul Slough. Congressman Gohmert talked to me about why, in the middle of a pandemic, he's still taking time to push for criminal justice reform. This is Raven 2-3, Presumption of Guilt. I'm Gina Keating.
Think again.
So I'm speaking with Congressman Louie Gohmert from Texas, and today is a really important day for the Justice for Warriors Caucus as well as for the men of Raven 2-3 or Biden 4. So let's talk a little bit about the Justice for Warriors Caucus and what its mission is. Can you tell me how it originated, who's in it, more or less, and what are the concerns of your members?
Well, thank you, Gina, and thanks for caring. I mean, it's a big deal. Actually, until I was hosting Sean Hannity's radio show, he's incredible and was so gracious to let me guest host a couple of times a year. And there was a story that appeared about a lieutenant named Clint Loren, and I read that story on the air and talked about that. Sounded like terrible injustice. And then that got Linda Sirocco, now Loren McLaughlin. It got her interested in that, and then she found out also about a sergeant named Derrick Miller. I hope that's not too complicated, but it was 2 cases that sounded like a terrible injustice against people who had volunteered to defend our country. And so I ended up meeting with Derrick Miller's mother, and I was even more compelled to do something to try to help him. And so I had helped. I did a letter. I was trying to push to get him a hearing, and when he got a hearing before the parole board, it was really important that we get his sentence reduced so that he would be eligible for parole. But he had been found guilty of basically a war crime for premeditated murder. And this is a guy, he was in Afghanistan, and it seemed clear to me that we were not going to win a war where you allowed the enemy to come walking through your camp, which they had rules that allowed that to happen. They had villages around them that were controlled by the Taliban, and and they could not shoot at anybody under. These are under the rules of engagement at the time. Even if they know for certain that they were Taliban, that they were shooting at them the day before, they had to wait for them to shoot at them first, and the Taliban had figured that out, so they didn't have any problem going right through their camp or driving right beside their camp, even with a truckload of they had RPGs or AK-47s, and he saw this guy the day before with weapons when they were going with another group that was going to fight against the Americans. And the next day, he's in the middle of their camp, and he recognized him. He grabbed him and grabbed an interpreter, and another sergeant demanded to know what he was doing. And at first he said he was there to fix an electric problem. He said, "You got no tools." That's a lie. you tell me what you're doing. He said, well, I'm here to fix plumbing. I said, you got no tools for that either. And so he realized this is a life-threatening situation to have a Taliban terrorist right in the middle of their camp. And they usually, if somebody they suspected of being a terrorist was walking through their camp, they were usually pacing off how far to certain things, which preceded a mortar attack that would kill Americans. So he grabs a guy and pulls his pistol, and he demanded to know the truth. The guy grabs his gun and starts trying to pull it away from him, and in the scuffle, the guy got shot. The interpreter and the sergeant gave the same. They separated them immediately, and they gave the same story, just what I've told you. But then the sergeant was threatened with as being a principal accomplice with for first-degree murder unless he agreed that the guy didn't try to grab the pistol. And so he ultimately changed his story. The interpreter wasn't changing his story until he was told, look, we know you've tried to get visas for yourself, your family to come to the U.S. If you'll change your story and say that the Taliban guy never grabbed for his pistol, then we'll get you visas for your family. You'll all be able to stay permanently in all likelihood, which happened. And that is just incredible. Now, they did have a mortar attack within 30 minutes, and according to his first sergeant that testified at his parole hearing, that if because of Sergeant Miller, there were lives saved because he spots this guy, grabs him. They got put on high alert, and people were ready. They knew a mortar attack was probably coming because of the Taliban guy, even though he hadn't been able to get back and give them measurements of how far the different things were in their camp. So anyway, I know the Congressional Black Caucus sent a letter on his behalf, and that wasn't, I wanted to do more than that. And having been in the Army active duty for 4 years, I knew the justice system in the Army, and I wanted to be there to testify for him. So Derrick wasn't even allowed to be at his own parole hearing. I couldn't believe the Army would have a system like that. But his mom and I testified, and there were a couple others that did, and we got his sentence reduced, and then that made him eligible for parole. Then after that, he had a separate parole hearing, and I showed up and testified at that as well, along with a number of other members of Congress who were very interested. Well, it made the difference, and he got paroled a year ago, June, or May, I guess. He got paroled May. So we were thrilled, and that was the impetus. You know what? We've got a lot of our valiant warriors that are being screwed over by the military justice system, and in these cases, it was often driven by a ridiculous rule of engagement. In the case during the Obama years, what I was told, even though the military would not give me the official rule of engagement, what they told our soldiers and our Marines, our people, were you cannot fire at somebody unless, number one, you're fired upon, and number two, you can be absolutely certain that no civilians are hit. And Duncan Hunter had been helping Navy SEAL named Gallagher, and he had a desire to do something similar. Unfortunately, Duncan's had some problems of his own in California, but he was a Marine, is a Marine, and so we ended up with initial members of Ralph Norman, Bill Flores, Daniel Webster, Paul Gosar, Brian Babin, Steve King, Ted Yoho, Scott Perry. Scott Perry made general before he retired from the military. So all of these guys had a great concern about what was happening. So we formed the Congressional Justice for Warriors Caucus to try to help people like Derrick and like Clint Lawrence. And I'm thrilled that, and we were pushing the president to pardon him. And that got that, the president, thank God, is a commander-in-chief that is not as concerned about pleasing others politically around the world as he is about protecting those that are protecting us. So he pardoned the guy. And I was very disappointed with Secretary of Defense Esper. He got his nose all out of joint, and I'm sure there were some other people that were furious. They were saying, "You're killing morale in the military." Well, maybe for the general or admiral that sends somebody to trial unfairly and unjustly, maybe it hurts their morale. But for the rank and file troops I talked to, they're saying, thank God we got a president that really is interested in protecting those of us who are laying down our lives for our country. So that's wow, that's a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely what I wanted to know. With everything that's happened in the last couple of days with General Flynn, and all of the hoopla around that, I just have to ask, this case, the Raven 2-3 Biden 4 case, is very different from the cases that you've championed so far in that these are civilian contractors. So why did you decide to weigh in on their side when clearly it means taking on the political baggage, not just of General Flynn, but also Eric Prince, Blackwater, and the failures of the Iraq War?
Well, we were just concerned about the people that were involved. And originally, we were not going to, the caucus was not going to assist civilian contractors. But then when we find out these are warriors themselves, they all served in the military, and then they hired on as civilians. And I was shocked first time, and the times I've been to Iraq, and especially when Dana Rohrabacher and I went up to northern Iraq, we were protected by some independent contractors. They were Blackwater, and these were the most dedicated guys. They were awesome, but they had all been in the military. And so that's what the Raven 23 or the Biden 4, they were often referred to as that. But these are people that had volunteered to serve our country in our military and then continued that service as civilians, being put in harm's way, and sometimes their jobs are every bit as dangerous or more so than our military, and that's what happened to the Biden 4. And what got us involved is when we had a briefing and found out these were warriors, and they were just thrown to the dogs by the Obama administration, especially by Joe Biden. They had a case stacked against them. The military turned over investigation to an Iraqi official that it appears was helping the insurgents, our enemies of Iraq. And our own military didn't even do any investigation, kind of like Derrick Miller. They didn't, in Derrick's case, all they had to do was have fingerprints checked on his pistol. They took it immediately after the shooting, his superior, and they never had it checked for fingerprints of the deceased. That would have ended it right there. But instead, they got rid of the pistol so that Derrick would not have a defense. In the case of the Biden 4, there was a car bomb that went off, and so they called these guys to run to the danger because we had a U.S. diplomat right in the area, and they were called in to try to protect him and get him out of the area. So they immediately went to an intersection and put up a roadblock till the diplomat could get by, and there was a vehicle that came charging and refused to stop. They fired some rounds over the vehicle. The vehicle wouldn't stop and appeared clearly to be ramming full speed ahead. And they started also taking small arms fire from around them. And this was a life or death situation. And this appeared to be a car bomb coming at them, even though it turns out supposedly it didn't have a bomb on it. We can't be that sure because our military turned over the investigation to the Iraqi leader who hated Americans. And there were reports that they picked up bags and bags of expended rounds, and yet when those four were brought to trial, the many different trials that they were brought to, they said, oh no, there was no evidence that any other rounds were expended other than theirs, yet they had pictures of their vehicle with gunshots in it. So anyway, this sounded too similar about like the cases of our military. These guys were prior military, so the caucus voted, let's get in and try to help these guys.
That's wonderful. Okay, so I talked to Derrick, and he said that you have some very specific legislative goals for Justice for Warriors. Can you tell us what those are, the legislation that you're sponsoring, and also if there are any other cases that sort of exemplify what you're trying to change?
Well, sure, and just so you understand my background, yeah, I had an Army scholarship at Texas A&M. I knew I was going to owe the Army 4 years after I graduated, but then Vietnam ended, and I was urged to go get further education so that the Army could develop their plan for a voluntary military instead of draft. And I said, well, I'd always thought about going to law school afterwards. After the Army, if we weren't at war, they said, go now. So I ended up going, getting a law degree. I had requested infantry. I loved the infantry, Eagle Scout. I was pretty good at all the stuff the infantry embraced. And so I didn't know whether I'd for sure be brought on infantry or JAG. They brought me on JAG and assigned me to the home of the infantry, which was Fort Benning, Georgia, still is. And that's where I served for 4 years, and I saw some injustices. And in fact, there had been some before, but they had been dealt with so that the same guy that refers a guy to court-martial would not be the one that raided the defense counsel, so that if the guy was acquitted or got too light a sentence in the head of the convening authority, he wouldn't lose his career. But you also have to understand, the Constitution gives Congress the authority to create a disciplinary system for our military, and that's where the Uniform Code of Military Justice came from. But it was shortcutting the process of civilian justice so that it had a delicate balance of making sure justice was done in the UCMJ, but also keeping in mind these would likely be in theater situations, combat theaters, where you would need to shorten the process some so that it would not interfere with fighting and mission readiness. Well, what we've seen now, like with Derrick, with Miller, with Clint Lawrence, with First Sergeant John Hatley, and others, and it happened to Gallagher too, these allegations arise in a combat theater. They bring them back to the United States where they don't have access to the witnesses. Then they tell them, no, we can't bring those witnesses back, and any of this is exculpatory evidence that would absolutely prove you're innocent. We don't have that anymore. Well, you can't do that. And so we're looking at ways to make the UCMJ more fair for our valiant warriors. And one of the things that I feel like actually is unfair and needs to be changed the same convening authority, usually a general or an admiral, that signs the order ordering that this person be court-martialed, they don't sign that order and want him convicted. Well, that's who picks the jurors, handpicks the jurors. And it's not like a civilian jury where you may, like when I was a felony judge here in Texas, we might have, 100 potential jurors come in that we would pick from to get the most fair 12. In the military, the commanding general or admiral sends it to court-martial, handpicks the jurors. They can be anywhere from 6 to 15 sometimes. And every juror knows they were handpicked because the general or the admiral expects a conviction. Well, that's not exactly fair. But another thing that we've seen, too, is in the case of some of these guys, they bring them back and they take them to trial before a jury of guys, men and women that have not even been in combat. Sometimes they have, but many times they haven't. They don't understand what it is to have bullets flying at you. Churchill pointed out that was about the most exhilarating thing a person could experience, was being fired on and the bullet missing. You need to have a jury of peers. So that's one of the things that I hope that we can work on. But another thing that really inspired me, Gina, is reading a brief in one of these parole cases and seeing that it said that through World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, there were 7 Americans convicted of war crimes. But just in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've had over 200. That tells you America wasn't being put first. We were putting our enemies first, not our own volunteers. So there are definitely a lot of changes that need to be made.
Yes, it sounds like it.
One of the other things that really important when somebody's been investigated, even if they're found not guilty or they're pardoned because of injustice or their conviction overturned, the Criminal Investigation Division title system, CID title system, it keeps that information of the arrest and all that in the system, so that if you try to go get a job or you want to get into law enforcement or want to get a weapon, you're denied because that information is still in the system. That's another grave injustice that we got to fix. But there's just a lot of issues, but that's another one, how they can hurt somebody that was totally not guilty in the first place.
Okay, one last question, if you wouldn't mind. You've described a system that sounds like it's broken. And there are, as Derrick and I have talked about, a lot of political motivations in some of these cases, including this case of Raven 2-3, the Biden 4. Can you talk about how the military criminal justice system has come to this pass, with prosecutors acting more like gang members and the military leadership just turning a blind eye to some of these misdeeds and kind of encouraging this behavior? What happened?
Well, this is my interpretation, my opinion, but it seems that in the years following Vietnam, and we get up to the present, and especially under the Obama-Biden administration, the military became extremely political. And I don't know if you're aware, but Obama had a number of purges where he would eliminate any leaders of the military and prevent them from being promoted. But they would literally purge people that did not agree with the political philosophy of the president. For example, if you felt like we should not spend defense money on sex change operations, you were going to be out. And it didn't matter that you thought it was fine if somebody wanted to have a sex change operation. You just felt like you shouldn't use money that could go for bulletproof vests or something for, you didn't think that should go for sex change. You're going to get purged at the highest levels. And so it became so political. And in the case of the Biden 4, there were so many outrageous, unjust things that happened that the first federal judge that took this up just threw it all out, chastised people involved. But then Biden goes over and he does a press conference with the president of Iraq basically saying, we're going to get these guys. And so that's what they did. They set out, they had a press conference, said they were going to get these guys, and son of a gun, they did. It became way too political, and that's where when politics gets too involved in justice, then there is no justice.
That is a great place to end this. Well, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today, and we're looking forward to see what's going to happen with this request for pardon. Have you talked to the president about this at all?
Yes, and we're hoping that we can get these guys pardoned. We will see what happens, but we're going to keep pushing. And actually, Gina, like I say, I'm so thrilled that you would allow this opportunity to talk about this for people that just wanted to serve our country. And by the way, Derrick Miller he's working for the Caucus now. He's unbelievable. And even though I'm a Christian, I don't know if I could be as upbeat and positive and much of an encourager as Derrick is. I mean, he is just such a blessing. His attitude, he just wants to help eliminate injustice in the military. So he's working for us. He's working for the Caucus. And Loren McLaughlin now is also helping with our caucus. So I hope you'll have me back so we can talk some more about some of the things that are going on, Gina. And again, thank you so much for caring and letting us get this message out.
Well, thank you very much. This is probably one of the most important stories I've ever done. So we'll talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much, Gina.